Hey, what's going on? Welcome to the Change Truth podcast. My name is Carl. I am the host, and today I'm really happy to be sharing the second conversation between myself and Kilindi. Kilindi is a martial artist who is also a proponent of high-dose psilocybin mushrooms. But chances are you already know that, because if you've been listening to my podcast at all, Kilindi's name comes up a lot in conversations, and the first conversation between him and I was also by far the most popular on YouTube. So chances are you've seen it already. And it also created a lot of discussion in the comment section on that YouTube video. And a lot of people had some really good points. So in this conversation, I did bring up and discuss some of the ideas that people shared in that video. So we do get into some of the comments people left. Thanks to you guys who did contribute to that discussion. We get into a lot. Kilindi is such a great speaker, and he's so confident and knowledgeable about this stuff that it's really a blast for me to speak to him. So just thanks to Kilindi for even talking to me. It was awesome again. And we start out the conversation with Kilindi talking about his second conference that he's put on in Detroit about psychedelics. So we get into that and go from there. And if you want to support this podcast that I do, please do. Check out my Patreon page. It's patreon.com/changetruth. And that's it. Check out the conversation. Let's get another discussion going and talk about these ideas. This is me with Kilindi.
We had the Detroit Psychedelic Conference. It was our second conference, and it got a really good response from the community and people coming in, the speakers. It was a great event, and I think it was kind of off the usual beaten path of the usual suspects. We actually got people who were going in and exploring on a constant basis to be able to deal with these type of entheogens, these type of psychedelics, power plants, and things like that.
Right. Was it like a lot of like kind of like your crew, like the people you work with and do these sort of high dose things with?
Well, some of them were. We had people from out of state and around the country who came out also.
Right.
But there were a few people who were from Detroit who were willing to give, their point of view on entheogens, and also to show the greater community. Hold on one second.
Yeah.
Hold on one second. Okay, we're good. I was in the other room and somebody turned the
radio or something.
the music up.
Right. So. Yeah, no worries. So like when you're, did you say this was the second conference? I thought it was the first one.
No, this was the second conference. We had a conference in 2014, and that was the first one.
Oh, okay. So when you do these, like, what's the goal that you have when you do this? Like, is this like, are you trying to just educate people, like the sort of community of Detroit, who people who don't have experience with this stuff, or is it kind of geared toward people who are already kind of dabbling in some of this thing and maybe are kind of psychonauts themselves already?
Well, actually, it's for both. Many of the psychonauts in the city of Detroit, they don't get a chance to go to Amsterdam or Prague or out to California, things like that. So we give it a local flavor where the people who are part of this community can do that. And then to introduce new folks to the psychedelic community and the different compounds and things that are all a part of that.
Right.
So
so you're geared at both, yeah.
So we had things for people just getting in, and then we had things for people who may have been experienced in journeying.
Right. So what were some of the topics that you covered there? Like obviously, if you and the people you work with are going to be talking about what we talked about last time, the high dose psilocybin experience. Did you also talk about other entheogens too? Were people talking about ayahuasca and all sorts of stuff?
Well, we kind of covered the gamut on that. It wasn't all high dose psilocybin. We talked about psilocybin in pregnancy, psilocybin in children. Talked about the endocannabinoid system, cannabis, some ibogaine or iboga. So we kind of we kind of covered the ground, but it was quite a few areas that aren't touched upon usually in conversations, at conferences and things like that, especially the entheogens during pregnancy and things like that.
Yeah, that stood out there right away. Like, what are you talking about with that? Like, as far as if it's safe or not, kind of thing, or?
Well, no, we're talking about women who are actually taking psilocybin while they're pregnant,
Wow.
journeying while they're pregnant, and most move to the second trimester of pregnancy to do that because the first trimester is kind of tricky. Things are, much more delicate at the first trimester, but women are actually having psychedelic babies, And,
What does that mean?
well, a baby who's been in the womb partaking of psilocybin because their mother's taking psilocybin while they're pregnant.
Right.
So we call them psilocybin babies.
Well, that sounds like it would be a touchy subject for some people. I have heard that, traditional people who've worked with ayahuasca for a long time in places like Peru, I think that they've done that, introduced pregnant women to their experiences and also like young children as well.
Yeah. Well, the Santo Daime Church in Brazil, the women in their pregnancies, they never stopped taking the brew during the services while they're pregnant. So that's kind of like the biggest study on DMT compounds that during pregnancy, and then other places about young children also taking psilocybin. We had one brother who had been, I think, started at 3 months, taking his mother, giving him psilocybin at 3 months to kind of calm him down instead of giving him teething medication and colic medication, things like that. They were giving him psilocybin, things like that.
Wow.
He's a grown man now, so we don't have to worry about
I mean, I guess that like speaks to, what you talk about a lot is like how non-toxic psilocybin is to the body. Because, there are things that you can't take. Well, like, if you drink alcohol while you're pregnant, that has really detrimental effects on the child. So if women are able to use psilocybin while they're pregnant, clearly it's not super toxic to the body, or because a baby in the womb is going to be pretty at risk to anything that's very toxic.
Yes. Well, the toxicity of psilocybin, as I said before, is on par with probably, apple juice or pineapple juice or something like that.
Right.
And then the active chemical, the DMT in the psilocybin, and I do say DMT in psilocybin because it's 4-phosphoroxy and then dimethyltryptamine, even though the scientists all want to say that is not DMT because of the phosphorus group and other things. It's an ingestible DMT, period.
Right.
The DMT compound is known by the body. The body knows how to handle it. So it's not a foreign compound. It doesn't do anything detrimental because, number one, your body generates it. Now, you can argue whether it's the pineal gland or not, but if it's generated in the pineal gland of most mammals, and the studies were done on rats, and it's being generated from that, we can pretty much bet that the human brain, pineal gland, along with the liver and the lungs, are generating DMT endogenously in the body.
Right. So you're saying that these state, like, basically at a certain amount, like if you take enough psilocybin, you're going to get to the same place that people get to when they like smoke DMT, say.
Well, that's not that the pregnant women are taking that much. No, but I've said that readily in many of my lectures that high dose psilocybin is an extended DMT trip in the smokable experience and range. In other words, that same spot you go to when you smoke DMT is the same spot you get to with high dose psilocybin. It just takes you more to get there because DMT is so powerful at such a small dose. It only takes the smoke and then going directly into the lungs. It only takes several seconds to get to that spot, and you stay there for a short period of time, and then you're back. Whereas with the psilocybin, you have to take a lot of it. It takes a little while. And once you go up the hill of that roller coaster, once you get to the top, you're in the same space as the DMT space. My experiences have led me experientially to be in the exact same spot that I left off the time that I smoked DMT on high dose psilocybin excursion.
Yeah, I could see that being true. I definitely felt when I took ayahuasca, and I've never smoked DMT, so I couldn't speak to that. But with ayahuasca, I felt like basically the same kind of thing as taking mushrooms. I mean, there's always little differences, but it felt very, very similar, very familiar. Same type of colored sort of visual type stuff, and same kind of it just felt like the same kind of world, same kind of thing.
Well, they're all DMT, so they're all going to put you in the same range of experience, same type of energy, although they diverge because of other factors at different dosages, but
Yeah.
pretty much the same area. Have you seen Dr. Strange yet?
No.
No, okay. Well, you want to see a high dose. Now, of course, it's nowhere near the actual experience. But for folks who've never taken mushrooms at, let's say, 15 grams or something like that, it's a full-on experience, that you'd be talking about at certain points of Doctor Strange. The people that done that movie, had to be doing their research, or they had to be doing psilocybin, ayahuasca, or something. And most presently, I would think it would be psilocybin that they were taking in producing this experience for the movie. Because the first thing that I don't want to mess up the movie for you, he drinks, Dr. Strange, when he gets to the Ancient One, he drinks some tea. The first thing to do is offer him tea. He drinks the tea, and then when she puts him into this state, he says, "What have you given me? Psilocybin or LSD?" So that's all part of the whole dynamic of Doctor Strange. And not to really digress so much into Doctor Strange, but Doctor Strange used to be kind of like on the C team in Marvel. He wasn't a team player. He wasn't Spider-Man, the Hulk, Thor, like that. He was kind of like on the C team because they always put him in the double comics where he'd be, half the comic would be Doctor Strange and the other half would be the Human Torch, or
right.
Doctor Strange and half would be the Hulk. But in 1974, Steve Englehart and Frank Bruner were given Doctor Strange to bring him up to par as an A-team Marvel hero. And what they would do was eat mushrooms and drop acid in the Village in New York. And that's how they made their deadlines. And the experiences that they would go through and talk about are things that they put into Doctor Strange. So that's the Doctor Strange that you get in the movie.
So do you know that for sure? Like, is that documented?
Yeah, you can Google it.
Oh, wow, they're open about it.
Yeah, just say LSD and Doctor Strange, or LSD, mushrooms, Doctor Strange, or Frank Bruner and Steve Englehart. Yeah.
Right. So since we brought up ayahuasca already, something people have commented on, like the last time we spoke, I got a lot of comments about the idea of you like ayahuasca using an MAOI, but with psilocybin. Like people are like, oh, Kilindi's taking 30 grams of mushrooms when he could just take 10 grams and throw in Syrian rue or whatever. And I think you've commented that you have tried it.
Yeah, well, that's part of the alchemical phase of entheogens, utilizing the monoamine oxidase inhibitor, and especially Syrian rue, because Syrian rue has things in it that, that the ayahuasca brew, the copy wouldn't have.
Right.
So, and that's basically pinealine, which is a compound also that's made endogenously in the body. And that one is known to be from the pineal gland.
I've heard of that. Is that also psychoactive itself, pinealine?
I think it's psychoactive at certain doses itself, yeah.
So did you find then that using Syrian rue and mushrooms did increase like the effects?
Well, it changed the signature.
Okay.
Mushrooms, in my experience, is actually the top of the line. As far as entheogens go, it's the oldest system of entheogenic use that we know of. Some are now putting forth some of the grasses and things like that, like Phalaris grass, or because some of the grasses have not only the DMT in it, and also the 5-MeO DMT in it, but also some grasses are purported to have also their own monoamine oxidase inhibitors in the grass.
Oh.
So between the grass and the mushroom, but we see that they didn't deify in the culture the grass. I don't know if grass is really palatable, not that mushrooms are really tasty.
Yeah.
But I don't think that the grasses were the first ones used. I believe that the mushrooms were used because they give a more grand visual display in nature. It's like, if I'm walking around looking for food and I'm hungry and I see this big mushroom, I'm like, that look like, something I could probably try to eat. Grass is everywhere. We know what that is, but
Yeah, right.
mushroom kind of sticks out.
Right. So you're saying when you use Syrian rue, it changes the experience, but it's not necessarily like it just takes you to a higher level. It takes you to like just a different type of feeling.
It takes you to a different feeling. What it does is it can potentiate it. In other words, if you take 10 grams and then take Syrian rue, it's like maybe you're taking 15 or something like that. So it does potentiate it, but in that potentiation, it changes the signature, because that's what Haoma is. Several of the somas. I think Ananda Bosman talks about that the Syrian rue is Soma Raja, or King Soma, that organizes all of the 107 different somas, because Soma wasn't just one plant. Soma was 101 plants and 6 mushrooms and different combinations at different times.
I see.
Those were the somas. But Haoma, which is the Persian or the present day Iraq, Iran area, Mesopotamia, that whole thing, Babylon, they utilized the Syrian rue and acacia, and also Syrian rue and the mushrooms as their brew. That's where you get all of the genie and Zoroastrianism, Ahura Mazda, the god of light, and all that comes out of that Haoma, which is the brew between the Syrian rue and acacia and the Syrian rue and mushrooms.
So you're saying it's not as simple as just saying, oh, put in the MAOI and it just makes it a higher experience. It's also that, like, if you add anything to these experiences, it's going to alter in minor ways. It's going to change things by creating different mixtures and things. They all have their own kind of signature to them.
That's the alchemy to it. And
right.
The harmalas and harmine and also the pinealine change your experience, because those are neurochemicals also that have an effect on your brain. They're several steps away from melatonin, and what they call endowaska. Are you familiar with endowaska from darkroom technology? Well, you have different civilizations that practice what was called darkroom technologies. You have darkroom yoga. You have the Anatolian civilization in Turkey that had the labyrinth caves and things like that, and pyramids. They used to create areas of darkness, of complete darkness without light. And you would go into there 7, 14, 21, or 49 days, eat foods that were dense in your tryptamines. And what happens is, after you're in the dark, melanin is only secreted in darkness. So melanin will start to accumulate. And as melanin accumulates, it's converted into all of the other exotic neurochemicals that we're talking about, 5-MeO, DMT. So if you go into darkness, complete darkness in 21 days, you start having an endogenous psychedelic experience on 5-MeO DMT. And what the the darkroom masters would do as they practice their darkroom yoga or darkroom martial arts or darkroom meditations, would then put the exogenous chemicals into the body also to do like a booster rocket, you know. So you had civilizations that would be underground, and these monks or priests or sojourners would be in darkness so long that they would be in a permanent psychedelic state by being in this darkness for so many weeks and months and things like that.
Well, yeah, that reminds me of things I've heard about, like the isolation tank that people use, and how, you know, the isolation tank, it not only is completely dark, but it cuts off all the other senses, or whatever. So yeah, people are pretty familiar with it. But I've heard, yeah, from people using it without adding any other chemicals, to reach these very psychedelic states of mind and these things, just by sort of meditating in that darkness for a long time.
Yeah. Well, I've been doing flotation tanks and things like that since the 1970s.
Oh, really?
And, although I've had some nice experiences inside of those tanks, none of them come anywhere close
Okay.
to a full-blown psychedelic experience.
Right.
And those people who claim that, like, okay, well, I meditate and that gets me in the psychedelic space, or I do yoga, that gets me in the psychedelic space. And those things are wonderful and good to do. But they may approach a small dose of psychedelics because they can possibly generate small doses of these neurochemicals accumulation in the brain to give you certain areas of the vision. But none of these things come anywhere close to a full-blown psychedelic excursion on DMT or high-dose mushrooms or anything like that,
Right.
And people, like I said, those people that claim that, they just don't know what the psychedelic experience is in the high dose, or they're claiming a low dose, say if you're taking mushrooms and you take two grams, you could probably pull that off meditating.
I see.
In a flotation tank, or some type of practice, qigong or tai chi or something like that. But then we're not talking about a full-blown 20 grams of mushrooms. That's the difference between a candle and the sun.
Right.
They both help you to see, but there's orders of magnitude between the two.
Right. I see what you mean. Yeah, you can maybe you feel like in these other states, maybe in an isolation tank, you can get to that point where maybe you see some sort of little visual things here and there, maybe some, whatever you call them.
Fractals, astral body projection or something like that, but not the density of information and density of the experience that a high dose psilocybin experience would bring.
But you are saying that, like you said before, like people who go into these really dark rooms for periods at a time, do you think they can achieve like these full blown states?
I think if you stayed in there long enough and accumulated long enough, I think you could. But nobody in modern times who's has the time to, you go, okay, I'm gonna go and sit in the dark for 3.5 months.
Right.
You pay the bills, you still have your children or your girlfriend or boyfriend or family and bills and all those type of things. We just don't have that now. If you're in a lamastery or you're a monk or something like that, and they still have access to that type of technology of being able to go into the darkness for that long, you would have a psychedelic experience if you could accumulate. If your body physiologically and chemically could produce enough chemicals, I think it's possible to be able to do that. But it's just difficult for people in modern times to be able to do that, and especially when you can just take a Saturday night and go in at 10 and be back out by 6.
Right. Yeah, it seems like to do it naturally, you do have to go to a very like extreme level. Like I've talked to people who experiment with fasting and that too, and they've talked about getting to pretty psychedelic states of mind in different ways, but they are also doing it in a very extreme way. Like they're fasting for many days at a time, and
Since I fasted for over 43 years, 40 days a year on water. I've done 40 days on water and urine. I've done fasting.
For 40 days?
Yeah, in my experience, I've never reached the level of a full-blown hallucinogenic mushroom experience.
Right. It doesn't quite compare.
Things I've done yoga. I'm a martial artist. That's what I do. That's my vocation. I've done martial arts for over 50 years. So I know all of the martial artists. I know the masters. I've met them. I knew Bo from San Francisco, Chinatown, who was the undisputed Chinese Kung Fu master of San Francisco, Chinatown. I knew all of the head guys of many of the different systems. Inuk Su from Kuk Sulwan. I mean, he was his mother was a Buddhist monk. His father was the Imperial Guard of Korea and all that kind of stuff. He got all of that, and I understand that a lot of them use entheogens and different potions from the alchemical realm. So I know martial arts, I know yoga, I know meditation, I know Zen, Shinto, all of that. But none of them come close to a full-blown mushroom experience. And this is what I preach, not for myself, because I know I experience it. It's things that I do. And I've done the other things too. So when folks say, well, if you just got an isolation tank, to most of them, I was in an isolation tank before you were born. Well, if you just fast 15 days, I say, I've been fasting 40 days a year for over 43 years.
Wow.
And I still haven't got that. Now, maybe my constitution is broke or something that I can't do what you do, because I can't say what a person's experience is,
Right.
But I think that maybe if you try this, since it's safe, you can get, you're not going to kill yourself with it. You can't kill yourself with psilocybin. You can't eat enough to kill yourself. So it's not going to physically harm you. You can't overdose.
Right.
Get you a dark room, put some pillows on the floor, pads on the wall, whatever you want to do, and take 25, 30 grams of mushroom, and then you come back and tell me the same thing.
Right. Because, you're comparing it to like this, pretty high, like the high level of these experiences, not just like this minor surface level of taking a couple grams, but you're like, if you want to go all the way, you got to just do this.
Well, you jump out into the ocean, you jump off the cliff. That's the whole thing. You go in where there's no, see, the thing is with small doses, and I think Terrence McKenna would say that the biggest difficulty with hallucinogenics is that people don't take enough. They take just enough to where they're still partially here. They're hanging on to so-called regular reality. And so they got 1 foot in regular reality and 1 foot in the entheogenic multiverse.
Right.
But when you step off completely into the entheogenic multiverse, you don't have anything to cling on to. So you're there. It's not, if you take 20 grams, you're going to be there. It's not going to be anything where I was almost there and things like that.
Yeah.
Difficulty is that, most folks aren't willing to do that. And that was very visible on the posts from our last talk.
Right, right.
I read the posts of most of you. There's no reason why you should take more than 5 grams.
Yeah, there was a lot of that, yeah.
Taking more than 5 grams, how do you know you did 5 grams?
Yeah, people are resistant to that. And I do remember Terrence talking, like I remember a specific one where he was talking about maybe him and his brother going down to maybe Colombia or Peru and working with like shamans down there, and how the shamans were just very resistant, and they didn't want to go that deep. They didn't want to go all the way.
Well, most shamans don't go that deep. They go enough to synergize themselves to what work they're trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
And they do that. They get the energy, but it takes a different type of person to want to go in fully, Right. And it's not that it's not fearful, or that you can be challenged inside of that, because it's going to challenge you. It's just, for me personally, I want to know what this thing is. I want to know how they built the pyramids, why they built the pyramids, what ancient civilizations, how did they, just from walking around doing nothing, just, walk around one day and say, hey, let's build a big temple, with no precursor, no reason why. But it's like, well, let's just build a big temple, for what reason? The reason is that these are things that they saw, and they wanted to pattern their society and their civilization after things that they saw in those exotic and novel realms.
Right. Yeah, you're pretty confident in that idea that like that's where these ideas came from, and that these people, like, it just seems like yeah, like you and the people also, like, I heard someone who works with you talk. I think he correct me if I pronounce his name wrong, but Mudu. Yeah, and he was also very confident. Like the way you guys talk about this stuff is just, I think people are so compelled to listen because you're just like, no, this is how it is. Like, people got this information from these states of mind, and it's just something that's so different than people are used to hearing. They're not used to hearing about these drugs. Actually, I mean, some people are, but the vast majority of people, they hear this and they go, what are you, like, really? You're talking about, you go do mushrooms and you learn about how to build a pyramid? Like, what? Like, it's a totally different idea than our culture is kind of used to.
Yeah. Well, you don't have, if you have a society that has no concept of a pyramid, because that's what it is. You have no concept of a pyramid. If you look at in the Sahara, the cave painting that say the Toxicity Plateau at Algiers in Algeria, which is now in the Sahara Desert. It's dry, but you have the cave paintings there that show when the Sahara was green, when there were animals there, when there were rivers, lakes, tributaries, streams, and you have no precursor of what a civilization is going to be just 1,000 years later. And then all of a sudden, you have pyramids, you have obelisks, you have Hippo-style temples, and all of these different types of things where you don't have the precursors for that. They didn't walk around from the Atlantean civilization to see pyramids in Egypt and to say, oh, well, let's make some pyramids in Egypt like the ones that were in Atlantis, or didn't say, let's make some pyramids in Mexico like the ones that were in Atlantis because we saw pyramids in Atlantis. Where do you see pyramids at? You see pyramids and things like that in these transdimensional dimensions and realms and worlds that show you exotic things, novel states. Once people started leaving their fruitarian diets and not hooked to constantly 18 hours a day eating, because all of the great apes, gorillas, and chimpanzees, and others, they spend the majority of their day socializing while eating. So they keep up enough protein source in their diet to make their metabolism, make their weight, to be able to stay healthy. But once you leave that and go to denser proteins, you've been eating fruit, and you got to eat fruit 16 hours a day to stay healthy.
Yeah.
Once you get a steak, the first thing you do when you get a big steak is, oh man, let me lay down and I don't feel like running around going to the next fruit tree to eat some more fruit. I feel like sitting down. And when you sit down and you have that point of leisure where you can go 8 hours without the next meal instead of eating 16, 18 hours a day. You eat a steak and you sit down and you say, ooh, okay, I'm sitting down here because I'm full, I'm sitting down. Okay, well, I never really noticed, that the big light in the sky thing, it starts over there and it ends on the other side, and it did that yesterday. And when I ate my steak the next day, it said, yeah, that thing keeps doing that same thing. It, we know it's light because that's when we can see, and it's dark, we hide from the big animals. But during the day that thing, it keeps going across the sky from that way to that way. And then at night, sometimes that same light, not as bright, is, it's sometimes it's big and sometimes it's not there, and then sometimes it's like a crescent. Because I now have the leisure, because I've sat down from eating that denser protein, and I can observe. Right. So when I encounter that mushroom and I eat the mushroom and weird things start happening, things that aren't in nature, and I see them, I put them on the cave. When I paint on the cave, I paint a cow. Then I paint a man. Then I paint a man in a suit with a helmet on, with I painted a man with a helmet on with boots. Now I didn't see any men walking around the desert or the grasslands with helmets and boots with laces in them. In the time where nobody on earth had a pair of shoes, they're drawing boots with laces in them. Why? Where did they get that from? The only place that they could have got that from, if they have no precursor on earth to see, it's not like, okay, we traveled, we're in Algeria and we traveled to Mesopotamia and we saw people wearing shoes. So when we come back, we draw people with shoes. No, this is a time when nobody on earth had shoes. And they're throwing shoes and boots and men with helmets and animals that they don't see in nature. Why do you do that? Because you saw them under the influence of these special plants and chemicals that have given us a novel state of consciousness and access to other areas of knowledge.
Right. You think it's pretty obvious after like exploring these states yourself, seeing what you see in these states, that you just make the connection, and is it almost like frustrating to you that like to you it's so obvious because you're so confident about what like these links that you make? Is it frustrating to see other people like not get it or not like believe it?
Well, I mean, I'm not really out to convince anybody else about it. I'm in it to share the information that this is what you can go and see and decide for yourself. Because the first thing I say is don't believe what I do, take the dose.
Right.
And if you don't come up with the same conclusions, then, you don't come up with the same conclusions. But I'm speaking on out of experience of what I've seen, not what people have told me. They're not tales from the dark side or tales from 10,000 years ago. They say, well, Hercules, picked the earth up from Atlas, and all that kind of stuff. No, I go into these states and I see these things that are in the legend and things that aren't in the legend, that are far beyond what men have put in books about the days of the gods and, demigods and superhumans and things like that. I see things and meet these creatures out there in the multiverse.
Yeah, it seems like there is, there's a level of resistance, and it's probably due to a lot of like cultural things, right? That like, people have just been sort of brainwashed in a way about what drugs are, and even people who are kind of on that spiritual path, like you were saying earlier, like maybe, they want to point to everything else to get to these states. They want to go do yoga, they want to go in isolation tanks, but when it comes to like taking whoa, hey, hush. When it comes to like taking a drug to get to this, they're just like, oh no, that's like cheating, or that's like, that's not the way.
No, it's kind of like in Contact, when he said, this is the way we've always done it. You don't want to be able to just be walking down the street and fall into a full-blown psychedelic state, because you'll be in a permanent psychedelic state because you won't be alive anymore. You can't just be driving down the street or driving down the highway at 70 miles an hour, then go into a full-blown psychedelic state, because it won't work for you.
Right.
It's no different than in yoga. They says that, okay, I'm going to do yoga, but it's the same as a full-blown psychedelic experience. I said no, because if it's the same as a full-blown psychedelic experience, number one, you wouldn't want to go to yoga every day.
Right.
Because it'd be like, oh man, when I get in that dead dog pose and the universe opens up and these wormholes open up and these exotic creatures start coming in, and I'm in the dead dog pose, people aren't talking like that. They aren't talking like, man, I really don't want to go today. They're like, oh man, it makes me feel great. I want to go and do it and be part of it and all that kind of stuff. But, I'm myself, and I'm not saying that I'm up and above anybody, because I'm like everybody else in this thing. I'm trying to figure it out. There are no masters here. There's no experts.
Right.
Every time I think that I have a handle on something, I get sunk through the ringer. So I know now not to, not to think that way.
Right. That's a good point, though. I like that. Point that
you'll get your behind handed to you.
I like what you were saying, that like, it points, like people maybe ask like, why would there be a drug or a mushroom that would take you to these states of mind? And I like what you're saying there. Like, it's for a reason. You don't want to get to these states by accident. These are like purposeful states that, taking a substance to get there is a really good way to do it, because you're not going to take that by accident. You're going to take it when you're ready to go there.
I can plan out my Saturday evening and say Sunday I can rest up before I get back into the regular week,
Yeah.
but not just be walking down the street and it happened, or I'm in meditation, it happened. I can, because you don't know when it would happen, whether I did the breathing right, whether the posture was just right. Every time it gets just right, boom, I'm there. And then how do you associate with all the other people in the yoga class when they're all going into high dose entheogenic sojourns from doing yoga? Because at high doses you can't be dealing with it. You can't be dealing with folks. It's not like, yeah, we ate some mushrooms and we went out in the woods and we were chasing each other, or I was eating some mushrooms. We were all looking at Bart Simpson and we smoked a few joints and things like that. No, a high dose entheogenic sojourn is laying down on the bed or the floor, hanging on. It's hard to even make it to the bathroom and back. So it's not a dose. It's not a social dose because you can't function.
Right. Yeah, I wanted to ask you about another thing too. Like we kind of touched on it before, that different combinations of things are going to bring on slightly different experiences. And I was thinking about, say if mushrooms became legal, there's a pretty good chance that what they're going to do is like extract the psilocybin out of these mushrooms and maybe put them in like a pill form or something. And I was wondering your opinion on that for two reasons. Like one, if they did that, obviously trying to do 30 grams of mushrooms to get that much psilocybin would be a lot easier if it's in a pill. But I was wondering if you believe that, like, similar to like marijuana, where marijuana has the THC, but it's also got things like CBD and this other stuff. Do you think there's other things in these mushrooms that are useful?
Yeah, well, I think that the cofactors there make a difference, and not that you can't have a psychedelic experience on the so-called inorganic or artificial psilocybin or whatever, the artificial psilocybin. I don't think it has the density of information. I don't think that it does exactly the same things because there's other cofactors in there that measure and direct where you're going and how you get there.
Right. So you think, yeah, it is beneficial to take these whole mushrooms. It's not just the psilocybin alone.
No, not just the psilocybin.
Yeah. I figured it would probably be similar, like something like marijuana, where they're just discovering there's all these different cannabinoids and all these other things in there. It's not just THC.
Yeah, and that's and some of those things are good things too, because many times the THC doesn't really come out till you heat it up, so you can take just like marijuana juice or ground leaves or things like that. As long as you don't heat it up, you can get the benefits of the others without the high. But once you heat it up, you're going to get the high and the other cofactors. But just extracting compounds from it, I'm not against that for certain reasons and certain levels. But for what I call the real work, the real entheogenic work, I think that the organic compounds are much more favorable to bringing about the experiences that you would strive for or need.
Right. And so I want to ask you, sort of like changing another direction here. Something you've talked about a lot, and other people who are with you talk about, is this idea that like there's other people out there who have a lot of power, whether it's religions or sort of elite people who are controlling things in this world, and they know about these things. Like it's no secret. Like they are keeping it a secret. Like they're keeping their use a secret. And who it's from anything from like, conspiracy theories like the Illuminati, or people out there with a lot of power behind the scenes who are accessing these things. But you're going the other direction, and you're being very public and open, and not just about your use, but that they're out there using these things too. And so my question is, like, are you like worried at all by like pointing the finger and being like, there's people out there doing this, they're keeping it on the DL, I'm telling everyone about it? Are you worried if they do have a lot of power and they're doing this, you're putting yourself on the line a little bit?
Well, I mean, they have barometers in the world to see where people's consciousness is. It's kind of like today. This is the presidential election day.
Yeah.
They make this whole thing up and make you think that there's a difference between the Democratic and the Republican Party when there's absolutely no difference. You have good cop, bad cop.
Right.
You have Trump, Clinton. I don't see any difference between them. But it's a barometer of people's level of belief and inclusion in a system that only works for about, a couple of thousand people. It doesn't work for everybody else because you have people who have tremendous resources and things like that. And it's about this. These aren't conspiracy theories. They're about 4,000 people on Earth who have 90% of the wealth of the Earth, and the other 5% is spread between everybody else.
Right.
So it's you have barometers to see where the consciousness of people are. You'll have your Roland Griffiths and your John Hopkins. You'll have MAPS. You'll have the Beckley Foundation, and you'll have the different conferences and things around the world. People will do this. Those people will do this and let these things go on to see where the people are. Their studies of where the people are. They're okay. Well, let that crazy guy Kilindi go out around and talk about 20 grams, and then they'll look at the posts of our previous show and say, well, let's see what the sentiment of the average, the average guy, who does do psychedelic, what do they think about the extremity of Kilindi E? So that way they let Kilindi go on because Kilindi is the barometer. You don't get rid of your barometer. You want to know what's going on in the psychedelic world, because this, I feel, is the key to getting out of many of the ills that the planet is in. And you can talk about the whole conspiracy thing, with Gordon Wasson and Timothy Leary and Ginsburg and others, whether that is true or false, doesn't really matter because the compounds themselves will breach all of the manipulation, the human manipulation inside of what entheogens are supposed to be because they're uncontrollable. That's why they're using them to the level that they are, but they want to see what comes from it. They want to see what's going on. So they use me as a barometer to let me run around the world and say that to see if anybody's listening to what I'm saying.
But I mean,
and not a lot of people listening. So,
but what if, as people do start to maybe listen more, and maybe if these things are a source of as much power as you kind of talk about, if people are using them to attain and keep that power, do you think eventually, as things get further and further along in this sort of conversation, and people start opening up to these ideas more, do you think there's going to be some kind of pushback from these people who you believe are using these things in that way? Like, are they going to get worried at a certain level?
Well, I think if they start seeing your Magnetos and Wolverines and Doctor Strange, I think they'll probably get into a bit of a tizzy. So they're trying to see if that happens also, so that they could have people that they have studies and things like that they're doing with these compounds to see if they can pull out the same things that some of us are talking about. Right. So you have your outside source studies, and then you have the personal studies, your inside studies, your outside studies, and they use data from all of it. Because as we're on Facebook and on Skype and other things, they're downloading, what he's got to say today, that type of thing.
Right. But so, I mean, it doesn't seem like you're too worried personally about putting yourself out there in this way and speaking about what, the truth that you see. You're just going to put it out there and, see what happens with it.
Well, I have children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. I've lived life. I've seen the world. What can they do to me? They can lock me up, or they can kill me. And, I'm gonna die anyway. So,
right.
Whether it's in 2022 or 2032, I'm still gleaning information from these compounds that, that the soul is immortal, and regardless of what happens to the physical body, I carry on and continue the same thing that I'm doing on a long Saturday night when I take these mushrooms. So I'll just be in the spot that I'm in most of the time anyway, doing the work that I've been doing as long as I've been doing it,
Right.
No, I'm not worried. No.
So, okay, I also want to ask about something we spoke about last time, which was something that you were experimenting with at the time, and you called it the interdimensional village, which was
Yeah.
basically an idea of trying to experiment if to see if it's possible that as people are doing, say, high doses of mushrooms at the same time, if you're able to in any way sort of link up and see similar things or communicate in some way when you're under the influence and in these other sort of realms of consciousness. Have you had any success with any of that?
Well, yes. One thing that mushrooms were called before they were called psilocybin, and people, knew what it was. It was called telepathy, but it's also a way of distance communication. What we're doing now, we're instituting certain technologies as far as maps are concerned. They're called Yiming Zhu.
Hmm.
The Yiming Zhu is a rare crystal that glows of its own accord, and what we're doing is we're moving towards, as people take their sojourns and their journeys, being able to map and then upload it into that crystal, so that that crystal, just like you use a hard drive or you make a DVD, you can give the map of that experiential place to someone else who had the Yimizu uploaded into his or hers. They utilize that as a map for all of the people involved to be able to meet up in a certain place. So it's kind of like hyperdimensional Google Maps. We all want to go to Dallas, Texas. So you load the Dallas, Texas map into the Yiming Zoo, and that Yiming Zoo can upload into the next one, so that when we want to go on a Saturday night at the same time to Dallas, Texas, we all access our maps and go to Dallas, Texas.
Right. It's funny. Like when you throw out the word crystal or whatever, and you start talking about crystals, people, there's going to be some eye rolling going on. One thing that, I was looking into crystals just a while ago, just to sort of get into the debate. One thing I found super interesting is, like often it's quartz crystals that are being talked about as being used for different purposes. And what's cool, like you mentioned, like computers and stuff, what like stores information in hard drives and a lot of like other uses for like in microchips and all these things, quartz crystals are used there. They use a lot of quartz to do all this stuff with technology, which is just kind of fascinating, given the sort of other characteristics that people say quartz has when it comes to these other things.
It had, and just regular quartz crystal has an abundance of information in it. If you take more than 10 grams of psilocybin and access a quartz crystal, you know what I'm talking about. That's one of the ways how you use the quartz crystal. I know some folks kind of do it a new agey type thing, like, make a wand out of it and clear people's aura and things like that. That actually works if you understand that it's hooked to an entheogenic experience along with that, because in that person's energy field, you'll have the symbols, you'll have entities, you'll have things that latch on. And by utilizing the quartz crystal under the influence of the entheogen, because that way it gives you sight to be able to see these things that people, say, oh, well, they're just doing some artsy-fartsy new age stuff, waving the crystal around, and that's supposed to do something.
Right.
It's on a whole different meaning if you've taken 10 grams of psilocybin, or,
right.
It takes on a whole different meaning.
So you're kind of, you're saying that like being under the influence of psilocybin it kind of like opens you up to perceiving other things that are happening in that we're just not like aware of in normal day to day.
On different dimensions.
Because I remember you also talking about, like last time we spoke, you're talking about like looking at like hieroglyphs or looking at, say, like the Persian carpet on the wall, and when you're under psilocybin, all of a sudden it kind of pops out and you start to see parts of it that weren't really available in your normal state of mind.
Well, that's why they call it the magic carpet. That's why mandalas and masks and things like that, there are places, there are technologies, there things that you can utilize and go to. Matter of fact, you said that, and I'm looking at a mushroom mass right while I'm sitting here. Um, so these things are technologies. We just don't perceive them anymore. Everything is information. Everything is technology. The parquet floors, the patterns in your bathroom floor, the paintings that you have, your fireplace, trees are information, chock full of information.
Right, I see what you mean.
Chock full of information.
Yeah, there was a quote.
Anything can be used as a source of information.
Yeah, someone I spoke to a while ago, he had a quote, and actually I didn't even remember it till someone pointed out in the comments. He basically said that, when you're ready to learn, or when you're sort of in the mindset of a student, everything becomes a teacher. And that was a quote that I really liked, that, there is information in basically everything if you're ready, if you're in a state of mind to learn from it, and that you can pull a lot of things from, whether it's artwork or anything out there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like you say, even trees, if we look at the movie Avatar is a good example of these type of technologies. Even though we have baby trees now, before they cut down all the big trees, the old trees, they still have some in the old growth forest and things like those big redwoods, and in Africa, those big baobab trees, and all of those type of things. You had these trees with root systems that hooked to the mycelial system that was connected all of the whole earth, and that's where you get that whole Gaian mind thing from, because of the accumulated information. So you got the trees' roots going deep into the earth, and then their branches going out into the sky, with each leaf accumulating information. So it's an informational source that can be utilized as a connection to other realms of knowledge and other places of sojourn.
And what's cool about that idea is, this is something I talked about before. I think I actually talked about it with Kai way back. But this idea that mushrooms, like the mycelium that's underground, is actually works as it's like an internet for like trees and whatnot. Like, it allows them to communicate to each other. All the underground, the highways of mycelium, that's all connected to all the root systems and everything. Which is kind of a cool way to think about, if we're using psilocybin mushrooms, it's almost like that same kind of idea.
Yeah, well, that same informational structure that's underneath the ground, that's the underworld, the land of potential, information, the dark realm, underground. That's where the mycelium is, and that's where the informational structure of what we see, which is the sexual portion of the mushroom, when it's getting ready to pores out and sequester new land, build new mushroom beds. The information is the underground portion of it.
Right. And okay, so I wanted to ask you this, and so I wanted to get a more sort of descriptive view of how, like, these days, when you're taking mushrooms and getting ready to prepare and go through this, I wonder if you could just walk through a bit of your process, and like what kind of mindset you're getting in, if you're kind of like what kind of intentions you're bringing when you're doing these experiences these days. And maybe also, like, if you're, say, someone new came to you and wanted to learn from you, what advice would you give someone who is starting to work their way up to higher doses? And what can people do to practically improve their experiences?
Well, one thing, I'll do the second one first, is that you tell a person it's not going to always be fun. Mushrooms are kind of easy with beginners. They show you all the beautiful stuff, then they challenge you. So it's not a race. It's not about who can do the most or who's the baddest or anything like that. You do it in a safe environment. And safe environment is like not sitting on the roof, not on the cliff of the mountains. You're in your bed, and the farthest you can fall is the floor,
Right.
but don't do it in the bed next to or on the couch next to the glass coffee table with the big sharp points, things like that, because navigation could be a problem. Go up incrementally in small doses. Don't just jump from 5 grams to 20 grams because you heard a piece of my lecture, you know.
Right.
And the guy Kilindi said, take 20. So you didn't hear the whole lecture. You know, I've never put anything up on YouTube or Vimeo or anything like that. And you sometimes get just pieces of the lecture, or you get a lecture at a conference that's only 25 minutes and you can't really put everything in there. So no, I didn't jump from 5 to 20. You go, you know, I suggest going 2 gram increments up, and there's no shame in backing back down if you feel overwhelmed at a certain dose. If 9 is like so overwhelming that you can't deal with it, you go back to 7 and you work at 7 for a while and creep up on 9 again later on in your experience. So it's not a race, it's not a test, it's not who takes the most, because there are people that take more than I do, you know, and they, you know, I don't know if it's a competition with them. They're like, yeah, I took 45 grams today. What do you think? I say, I don't know, because I've never taken 45 grams. So you school me on what 45 grams is like. So there are people that take more than I do, you know. But I do take high doses. The highest dose I've taken is 40 grams. That's dried mushrooms, not wet. And it's not to prove anything to anyone. And how I prepare myself, I just don't eat for about 6 hours, 8 hours before the experience.
Okay.
Although I have eaten and taken them, you know, I find it better for my stomach not to eat for a while, and that's a personal thing. Some folks eat, some folks, since there's not really any contraindications, because it's no more harmful than eating the regular button mushrooms. They're 90% water, fiber, vitamins, minerals, and then the special one had the psilocybin in it, and the other, you know, other cofactors as far as entheogenically. And I take time to kind of calm myself, set the intention of what I'm trying to do, and maybe accessing genes in real time to be able to see them function, or maybe to commune with my teacher, or to go see Kai. It could be many different things according to what I'm trying to do. And then I bolster my courage and I go in and eat them and I lay down in the dark. That's pretty much it.
Right.
So, you know, it's not anything exotic. People can ritualize it. Some folks, you know, take a hot bath before, and put their favorite oil on, and you know, chant for a little while or something, or meditate and things like that. And any of those things that you want to do as a personal ritual is fine to do, you know. But that's just my way of doing it. I just set my attention and then just hold on.
Right. So you do go in with like at times specific intentions. You don't just simply go in and go, okay, whatever comes. You are able to sort of steer it a little.
Sometimes I do that, but most of the time I'm trying to accomplish a particular goal, and sometimes I get sidetracked.
Right. Yeah, right.
That I don't get to that goal, you know. But that's where your discipline comes in. That's where your yoga, your meditation, your breathing, all those things come in. You know. You know. So yeah.
Right. Okay. I don't know if there's anything else too specific. Let's see. I mean, if people want to hear more about that conference, I think you linked me. You have a DVD of the whole conference. Is that right?
Well, it's not the whole conference, because it's a 3-day conference, so that would be like a.
Oh, right. Yeah. It's like
that'd be like a 24-hour DVD.
Right.
There's excerpts from the conference, shows some of the clips from some of the talks, you know, main highlights and things like that.
Oh, okay.
It showed just the particular flavor of it, you know, because we didn't really want to get into each speech DVD.
Right. So you've edited it down a bit. You've made it more concise.
Some, yeah. So unless somebody wanted to order the 10 DVDs,
yeah, that would be a lot, I guess.
That would be a lot. But you can, if you're interested in the DVD, you can just email me that you're interested in the conference DVD, and that's kilindi@hotmail.com. That's KILINDI @hotmail.com. Once more, KILINDI @hotmail.com, and just say you are interested in the DVD, and I'll shoot you a link to the conference DVD, and you can, as I said, see the flavor of that and how it went.
Cool. Yeah, I'll try to remember to include a link to that email too, if people want, in the description to this. Yeah, I don't know. Is there any other closing sort of thoughts you have?
No, just trip hard, trip safe, and I'll see you in the multiverse.
Okay, maybe we could also end, like, one thing I like to ask people these days is when thinking about the future of our sort of communities and our cultures, if these things come into play in a bigger way and start to become more popular, like, how do you have any vision for the future of, say if mushrooms became legal tomorrow, what like 10 years down the road might look like? Like, how do you see these things changing stuff on a bigger kind of scale?
I think that mushrooms would usher in a new human paradigm, out of the human into the unimaginable, into the next level of what we're becoming. As I spoke in a few of my lectures, the organic singularity, which is merged with the technological singularity with, Ray Kurzweil and
right.
Peter Garris and all of those folks, So a merging of the organic and the so-called AI and the organic and, just the plenum of information that we have on Earth taking us into something else, So I don't see, I see humanity leaving the human in less than 20 years. You have beings that are organic beings that are no longer human as the AI rises into the fold as a full-blown artificial intelligence.
So you see it kind of being like a natural, almost like evolution, something that's sort of bound to happen, it seems like.
Yeah, we're getting to the point where the curve is getting ready to become vertical.
Right, the exponential sort of growth.
Exponential growth. It sneaks up on you. The first, if you put, if you exponentiate a drop into a pool, the first 10 drops is not going to be pretty much in the pool. But when you get down to the last couple, it's
right.
It's going to happen before you know it. It's from a drip to a whole ocean dropping into the pool, and that's how it's going to be. Before we know it, we're no longer going to be human, and we'll be something else. We just don't know what that something else is yet.
Wow. Yeah, that's a cool idea. I like it. All right. Yeah, cool. Well, thanks a lot for talking to me again, Kilindi. It's been awesome. I really enjoyed it.
So, thanks for having me again, and I'll see you next time.
Yeah. All right.
Maybe next year.
Yeah, sounds good.